Thanks for tuning in to Crazy Mango Stories. Give a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell for more betrayal stories. Open the front door to a dark and quiet house, the comforting aroma of dinner faint in the air. It was late, almost 9 p.m., but I'd been at the office all day trying to meet a deadline. I dropped my bag on the kitchen counter and glanced around. Natalie was nowhere to be seen. She'd usually be on the couch by now, flipping through Netflix or reading one of her romance novels. My stomach growled as I opened the fridge, pulling out a beer and a leftover sandwich. Suddenly, I heard soft footsteps from the stairs behind me. "Hey, you're late," Natalie said, her voice unusually steady, as though she had rehearsed for this moment. I turned around, seeing her standing in the doorway to the living room. Her arms were crossed and she wasn't smiling. Something felt off. Her expression lacked the warmth I was used to seeing in her brown eyes. I shook off the creeping sense of unease. "Yeah, long day. Sorry, everything okay?" She sighed, stepping closer. "Alex, we need to talk." The dreaded words. 4 of them that usually meant something was about to go very wrong. I put down my beer and leaned against the counter, bracing myself. "Okay, what's going on?" Her lips trembled before she spoke, and for a moment, I thought she was going to burst into tears. Instead, she squared her shoulders, her voice steady, almost clinical. "I want to date other men." The room spun, the silence between us so thick I could barely breathe. I stared at her, trying to process what she had just said. My ears rang as my heart thudded in my chest, confusion blurring my thoughts. Date other men? What the hell was she talking about? "Natalie, what? What do you mean?" My voice cracked, disbelief coating every word. She met my eyes, her expression firm. I want more experiences, to see other people. When we've been together for so long, and I've never had the chance to know what it's like with anyone else." Her words sliced through me like a knife. How could she be so calm while tearing our life apart? How could she talk about experiences like she wasn't about to obliterate everything we'd built? "We've been married for 7 years, Natalie," I choked out. "How can you just throw that away? We've had a good life together, haven't we? What about us?" She shifted, crossing her arms tighter as if trying to shield herself from my words. "It's not about throwing it away. I love you, Alex. But this isn't about love. It's about freedom." "Freedom? From what?" "From me?" I shot back, the bitterness starting to creep into my tone. Her eyes softened momentarily, but then hardened again. "No, not from you. From the confines of what marriage has become for me. I've only ever been with you, Alex. And I need to know what it's like with someone else. I deserve that." I felt like I was punched in the gut. The air left my lungs, and I stood there, staring at the woman I thought I knew, but who now felt like a stranger. How could she stand there and tell me she deserved someone else? How could she say that after everything? "You deserve it," I echoed, shaking my head in disbelief. "Natalie, this isn't how marriage works. You don't just go out and experience other men. We made vows, and I meant those vows, Alex. I still do. But I need this. I thought you'd understand." Her voice softened, like she was trying to comfort me, but her words only deepened the wound. "You thought I'd understand?" I laughed bitterly. "You really think I'm just going to sit here while you screw around with other guys? You thought I'd just be okay with that?" She hesitated, but didn't back down. "You've always been so fair, so reasonable. I thought maybe you'd let me have this. I'm not asking for a divorce, Alex. I don't want to end us. I just want more." I stared at her, the anger simmering beneath the hurt. "You want more? And what am I supposed to do, huh? While you're off screwing other men, I'm just supposed to sit here and wait for you to come home like nothing's changed? Like you're not completely destroying me?" She flinched, but her voice remained steady. "You're not being destroyed, Alex. You're overreacting. It's just a phase. I want to be honest with you about my needs." Overreacting. I felt the heat rising in my chest. "You're talking about sleeping with other men and calling it a phase. If you think I'm going to sit by and be your doormat while you explore your options, I'm giving you the chance to accept it. To accept me, all of me. Because if you love me, Alex, you'll let me have this." And he shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. "This isn't love, Natalie, and this is selfishness. You don't want to grow old together. You want to have your cake and eat it too." She sighed, rubbing her temples as if I was the one being unreasonable. "I just need you to trust me, Alex, so we can get through this." I couldn't take it anymore. The sheer audacity, the arrogance of her thinking I'd just go along with this insanity. "No, Natalie. No. If this is what you want, if this is what you think you deserve, then you've already made your decision. You're not the woman I married." She blinked, tears welling in her eyes, but I didn't care anymore. My heart was broken, and her tears couldn't put it back together. "I never thought you'd be like this," I whispered, the words barely escaping my throat. "I never thought we'd be like this." For the first time that night, she looked genuinely hurt. But I couldn't bring myself to care. "I'm leaving," I said, grabbing my jacket. "And when I come back, I expect you to know what you really want, because I'm not going to wait around while you figure out if I'm enough for you." I slammed the door behind me, leaving her in the quiet house. I drove aimlessly, the hum of the engine and the darkened streets offering little comfort. My thoughts raced, jumping between disbelief and anger. The audacity of her standing there in our home, telling me she wanted to sleep with other men. I couldn't wrap my head around it. This was Natalie, my wife, my partner for 7 years. I thought we were solid, unshakable. Sure, we had our ups and downs like any couple, but never in my wildest dreams did I imagine her pulling something like this. I hit the steering wheel in frustration, the pain of betrayal sinking deeper with each passing moment. Eventually, I found myself at the only place that made sense in that moment, my best friend Mike's house. We'd been tight since college, and he was the one person I knew could make sense of the madness swirling in my head. I pulled into his driveway and knocked on the door, hoping he was still awake. The door opened, and Mike stood there, a beer in his hand, his face instantly shifting from surprise to concern when he saw me. "Alex, it's late, man. What's going on?" he asked, stepping aside to let me in. I didn't answer right away. The words were caught in my throat, and I realized how ridiculous they sounded, even in my own head. I stepped inside, the warmth of the living room doing little to ease the chill settling in my bones. "Can I grab a beer?" I muttered. Mike nodded, gesturing to the fridge. "Help yourself. Take a seat, man. What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." I popped the cap off the bottle and took a long, slow sip, trying to calm the storm of emotions raging inside me. Mike sat across from me, his eyes never leaving mine, waiting for an explanation. "Natalie," I started, my voice low. "She wants to date other guys." Mike's eyebrows shot up, clearly not expecting that. "What the hell? Did I hear that right?" I nodded, swallowing back the rising anger. "Yeah, you heard right. She says she wants more experiences, whatever the hell that means. She actually stood there and told me she wants to date other men, and that I should be fine with it. That if I loved her, I'd let her do it." So Mike stared at me for a second, processing what I just said. Then he shook his head, incredulous. "Hey, were you serious? Man, I'm sorry, but that's insane. What the hell is she thinking?" I laughed bitterly, taking another swig of beer. "Your guess is as good as mine. I don't know what's going on in her head. All I know is that she dropped this bomb on me tonight like it was nothing." "Jesus, Alex," Mike muttered, rubbing his face. "So what are you going to do? You're not seriously considering going along with this, are you?" "Hell no," I snapped, the words coming out harsher than I intended. "I told her I'm not going to sit there while she screws around with other guys. She acts like I'm being unreasonable for not wanting an open marriage." "An open marriage, Mike? Where the hell did that even come from?" Mike leaned back in his chair, letting out a long breath. "I don't know, man, but I'll tell you one thing. You can't just sit back and let her walk all over you. That you've got to make a decision, and fast." "Ian?" "Yeah, I know," I muttered. "But it's not that simple, Mike. I love her. Or at least I thought I did. Now, I don't even know who she is anymore. People change, Alex. But this is messed up. You've got to ask yourself, is this really someone you want to be with if she's already got one foot out the door? Because that's what this sounds like. She's testing the waters with someone else, man, and it's only going to get worse if you let it." I knew he was right. Deep down, I knew. But hearing it out loud from someone else made it real in a way I hadn't been ready for. Natalie had already checked out, hadn't she? The signs were all there. The late nights, the way she'd been distant lately. I'd chalked it up to stress, to her needing space, but now it all made sense. "I guess the real question is," Mike continued, his voice gentle but firm, "are you willing to fight for her, knowing she might not be willing to fight for you?" I sat there, the weight of his words sinking in. Was I willing to fight for someone who didn't value me enough to stay committed? The thought made my stomach churn. No, I wasn't. Not if she didn't want to fight for us. "I don't know, man," I admitted, running a hand through my hair. I don't know how we got here. I thought we were happy." "Maybe you were," Mike said, his tone cautious. "But she wasn't. At least not in the way she wants now. And that's not your fault, Alex. People change. But that doesn't mean you have to accept whatever bullshit they throw your way." He nodded slowly, feeling the truth of his words settle over me. I had a choice to make. Stay and let Natalie walk all over me, or leave and preserve whatever dignity I had left. Mike leaned forward, his voice serious. "Look, I know this sucks. It's brutal. But you need to stand up for yourself. You can't let her make you feel like you're the problem here." "Yeah," I whispered, my throat tight. "You're right." I finished my beer and stood up, feeling the exhaustion finally catching up with me. I should go. I need to clear my head. Mike stood up with me, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "You know where I am if you need anything, man. Don't hesitate to call." "Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it." I left his house, the night air cool against my face as I walked back to my car. The weight of the conversation lingered, but for the first time since Natalie had dropped the bombshell, I felt a small sense of clarity. I couldn't control what she wanted, but I could control what I accepted. As I drove away, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to be the man who stood by while his wife tore their marriage apart. So if she wanted to go down this path, she could do it without me. I spent the night driving, trying to sort out the tangled mess in my mind. The anger came in waves, followed by disbelief, then a hollow sadness. It wasn't until I found myself parked in a deserted lot at the edge of town, hours later, that I finally stopped to catch my breath. The question that had been gnawing at me all night echoed again. How the hell did we get here? I had to face her. No matter how much it hurt, No matter how much I didn't want to hear any more of her twisted logic, I needed answers. If this marriage was falling apart, I at least deserved to know why. By the time I pulled into her driveway, it was early morning. The house loomed in front of me, dark and silent, as if nothing had changed, but I knew better. Everything had changed. The person I thought I knew, the woman I had trusted and built a life with, was a stranger now. The front door creaked as I stepped inside. The house was quiet, the kind of stillness that felt too calm for the storm brewing beneath the surface. Natalie was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the coffee table like it held all the answers. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes bloodshot from crying, but I wasn't ready to feel sympathy. "You're back," she said softly, as if she hadn't shattered everything between us just hours before. I stood there for a moment, just staring at her, trying to figure out what to say. I wanted to yell, to demand why she would do this. But when the words finally came, they were quiet, controlled. "Ain, I need you to explain to me, Natalie," I said, stepping into the living room. "I need you to tell me how you think this is okay, how you could look at me, the man you married, and say you want to sleep with other men like it's just some casual decision." She wiped her eyes but didn't meet my gaze. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Alex." I laughed bitterly. "Didn't mean to hurt me? What the hell did you think would happen? You talk about wanting experiences like this is some kind of hobby, but this is our life, Natalie, our marriage. You can't just..." I had to say something, she interrupted, her voice rising. "I can't live like this anymore, pretending everything's fine when it's not. I need more than what we have." My hands clenched at my sides as I fought to stay calm. "You need more. We've been married for 7 years. Natalie, I've given you everything, my time, my love, my commitment. How can you sit there and say that's not enough?" She stood up, pulling the blanket tighter around herself, as if it could shield her from the confrontation. "It's not about you, Alex. I love you, but I need to explore who I am outside of this marriage. I've never been with anyone else but you, and I feel trapped." "Trapped," I echoed, my voice thick with disbelief. "You feel trapped with me, in our marriage." She bit her lip, her eyes finally meeting mine. "Yes, I know it sounds selfish, and maybe it is, but I can't ignore these feelings anymore. I'm not asking for a divorce. I'm asking for space, time to explore. To see if there's more out there." "More?" I whispered, shaking my head. "You want to see if there's more, while I just wait around? Is that it?" Her silence was answer enough. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "So you're telling me I'm supposed to just sit here while you go off and experience other men? And then what, Natalie? You come back when you're done and everything goes back to normal? Is that your plan?" Tears filled her eyes, but I was too far gone to care. "I don't know what I expected, Alex. I thought you'd understand." "Understand?" The word was a snarl now, barely contained. "You thought I'd understand that you want to sleep with other men, that you want to throw away everything we've built, just because you've got some itch you want to scratch. It's not like that," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's not about sex. It's about figuring out who I am." I stepped closer, my fists clenched at my sides. "Who you are. You're my wife, Natalie. We built a life together. We made promises to each other. How does that not matter to you?" Tears spilled down her cheeks as she finally broke down. "It does matter. You matter. But I feel like I'm losing myself and I can't breathe. I love you, Alex, but I need this. I need to figure out who I am or I'll never be happy." Her words hung in the air, twisting like a knife in my chest. I stood there breathing heavily, trying to process the sheer weight of her betrayal. She wasn't asking for my permission. She was telling me that this was happening whether I liked it or not. I shook my head, stepping back. "I can't believe this. I can't believe I married someone who would do this." She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." But her apologies meant nothing. "Not anymore. And I can't do this," I muttered, turning away from her. "I can't be a part of this." "Alex, please," she begged, reaching for me, but I pulled away. "No," I said firmly. "You've already made your choice. Now it's time for me to make mine." I walked out of the living room, her sobs echoing behind me as I headed for the stairs. I needed to get out of this house. I needed to get away from her. Upstairs, I grabbed a suitcase and began throwing clothes into it. Each shirt, each pair of jeans, felt like a final nail in the coffin of the life we had shared, the life I thought we had, and I heard her footsteps behind me, but I didn't stop packing. I couldn't face her. "It's not now." "Alex, please don't go," she said, her voice small, broken. "We can talk about this. We can work it out." Out. I slammed the suitcase shut, the anger boiling over. "There's nothing to talk about, Natalie. You made your decision. You want to screw around with other men. Fine. But you're not doing it while you're married to me." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice cold. "I'll be back for the rest of my things later. But as far as I'm concerned, this marriage is over." She collapsed onto the bed, sobbing into her hands, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The love I once felt for her was buried under the weight of her betrayal, and I didn't know if I would ever find it again. I grabbed my suitcase and walked out of the bedroom, out of the house, and out of the life we had built together. I didn't look back as I walked out of the house. There was nothing left for me inside. The woman I had married, the one I thought I'd grow old with, was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. It felt like the whole world was slipping through my fingers, and all I could do was walk away. The sky was still dark, but there was a hint of dawn on the horizon. I threw my suitcase into the trunk of the car, got in, and just sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The weight of everything was crushing, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. How had this happened? How had I missed the signs? Or maybe I hadn't missed them, maybe I just ignored them, hoping that the problems would go away on their own. But they hadn't. Now they'd exploded in my face, and all I could do was pick up the pieces of my shattered life. I started the car and drove off into the slowly waking morning, the roads nearly empty. I had no destination in mind, just a burning need to get as far away from Natalie as possible. My phone buzzed on the seat next to me, probably her, trying to call, trying to fix the unfixable. I didn't even glance at it. Whatever she had to say didn't matter anymore. Nothing she could say would change what she'd done. After an hour of driving, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, a flickering neon sign and a few rooms scattered along a single strip, but it was enough. I didn't need anything fancy. I just needed a place to think, to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. The room was small and smelled faintly of mildew, but it was clean and the bed looked halfway decent. I tossed my suitcase on the floor and collapsed onto the bed, staring up at the cracked ceiling. Everything felt surreal, like I was stuck in some nightmare I couldn't wake up from. My phone buzzed again, and this time I couldn't ignore it. I reached over and grabbed it, staring at the screen. As I expected, it was Natalie. Several missed calls and a string of text messages lit up the screen, each one more desperate than the last. "Alex, please come back. We can talk about this. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just need you to understand. I love you. I don't want to lose you." I tossed the phone onto the nightstand, my stomach churning with a mix of anger and grief. She said she didn't want to lose me, but she'd already thrown me away. How could she say she loved me while asking me to stand by and watch as she destroyed everything we had? The worst part was I still loved her. Even now, even after everything, I couldn't just shut it off. That was the real betrayal. My heart still clung to her, even as my mind screamed that she wasn't worth it. I felt like a fool, torn between the life I'd built and the cold reality of what it had become. I lay there for hours, letting the anger simmer, until it finally dulled into exhaustion. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, my body heavy with the weight of it all. I closed my eyes, hoping for some brief respite, but sleep didn't come easily. My mind kept spinning, replaying the moment she said those words over and over again. "I want to date other men." Those 5 words had shattered everything. I woke up to the sound of knocking at my door. My heart leapt into my throat as I jolted awake, my mind scrambling to figure out where I was. It took a moment to remember the motel, the fight with Natalie, the suitcase. The weight of it all came crashing back down on me. The knocking came again, and this time I forced myself up, my body protesting every movement. When I opened the door, I wasn't sure who I expected to see, maybe Mike, checking in on me, or even some random motel staff. But what I wasn't expecting was Natalie standing there, her eyes red and swollen from crying. For a second, neither of us spoke. She just stood there, clutching her purse, looking as lost and broken as I felt. Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face, to tell her to go back to whatever freedom she wanted so badly. But another part of me, the part that still loved her, wanted to pull her into my arms and make everything go away. I settled for stepping aside, letting her in. She walked past me, her head down, and sat on the edge of the bed, wiping at her eyes. I closed the door and stood there, arms crossed, waiting for her to speak. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't say anything. What was there to say? Sorry wasn't going to fix this. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with guilt. "I didn't know you'd leave. I don't know what I thought, but I didn't think you'd actually go." "Well, what did you expect, Natalie?" I asked, my voice cold. "You dropped a bomb on me. You said you wanted to date other men. What the hell was I supposed to do? Stay, sit around, and wait for you to explore your options?" Her lip quivered, and she looked down at her hands. "I didn't mean for it to come out like that. I'd been feeling lost, Alex. And I didn't know how to talk to you about it. I didn't mean to push you away." "You didn't mean to push me away," I repeated, incredulous. "You said you wanted to screw around with other guys, Natalie. That's not just pushing me away, that's lighting our marriage on fire and watching it burn." "I didn't want that," she cried, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you. I feel so trapped. I love you, Alex. I do, but I need more. I need to figure out who I am." "You keep saying that," I muttered, shaking my head. "You need more, you need freedom, but what about me? What about us?" She wiped her eyes again, her hands trembling. "I don't want to lose you." "Well, it sure as hell doesn't feel like that," I shot back. "Because everything you've done is pushing me further away." There was a long, agonizing silence between us. She stared at the floor, and I stood there, waiting for her to say something, anything that would make sense of this nightmare. But there was nothing. Just the empty space between us, filled with all the things we couldn't say. Finally, she stood up, her movements slow and hesitant. "I know you're hurt. I know you hate me right now, but I'm begging you, Alex. Please, don't end this. Don't end us. So I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of her words settle over me. The anger, the betrayal, the love I still felt for her, it all tangled together, making it impossible to see the path forward. Could I really end this? Could I walk away from the woman I had spent years building a life with? I don't know. Natalie, I said quietly, my voice thick with exhaustion. I don't know if I can do this anymore. She reached out, but I stepped back, keeping the distance between us. I need time, I said, my voice firm. Time to figure out what I want. Because right now, I don't know if I can be with someone who doesn't know if they want me. Her face crumpled, and I saw fresh tears spill down her cheeks. But I couldn't comfort her, not this time. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. And for the first time, I believed her. But that didn't change what she had done. It didn't change the fact that our marriage was broken, maybe beyond repair. I'll call you, I said, opening the door. But right now, I need to be alone. She nodded, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Without another word, she walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, feeling as empty and lost as ever. And when the door clicked shut, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I sank back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling, and the silence was deafening, but it was better than the lies. The truth was, I didn't know if we could ever fix this. The days that followed were a blur. I couldn't bring myself to go back to the house, to Natalie. Every time I thought about seeing her, I felt the weight of her words pressing down on my chest, suffocating me. I spent most of my time at the motel, alternating between staring at the ceiling and wandering aimlessly through town. Mike checked in on me a few times, bringing over food and beers. He didn't ask too many questions, just sat with me in silence, occasionally offering a few words of comfort. I appreciated it, but nothing could dull the pain. Nothing could ease the gnawing sense of loss. One evening, as I sat in the dim motel room, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Natalie. Can we talk? Please, Alex. I'm lost without you. I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if there was anything left to say. We were stuck, spinning in circles of confusion, anger, and hurt. But after everything, a part of me still wanted to hear her out, to see if there was anything left to salvage. Could there be? Could I really walk away from 7 years of marriage without looking back? I didn't respond right away. Instead, I shoved the phone back into my pocket and left the motel room, heading for the small bar down the street. The familiar buzz of conversation, the clinking of glasses, it was a temporary escape, a place where I didn't have to think about the wreckage of my life. The bartender, a wiry older guy named Jake, nodded at me as I sat down. You look like you've seen better days, man. What'll it be? Whiskey, I muttered. Make it a double. Jake poured the drink without asking any more questions, sliding it across the bar with a knowing look. So I downed it in one go, the burn in my throat momentarily distracting me from the deeper ache on my chest. So I didn't want to think about Natalie, didn't want to think about the mess she'd left behind. But no matter how hard I tried to drown out, her words kept playing in my mind over and over again. I need more. I need freedom. What the hell did that even mean? How could she say that after everything we built together? I slammed the glass down on the bar, signaling for another. So the second drink went down smoother, numbing me to the point where the anger finally started to fade. But in its place came something worse, a deep, hollow sadness. I'd given her everything, and it still wasn't enough. But what was left for me to give? Was I even capable of being the man she wanted? Or was this just a slow, inevitable collapse? I was halfway through the third drink when my phone buzzed again. I groaned, pulling it out, expecting another desperate message from Natalie. But this time, it wasn't her. It was Mike. You okay, man? Haven't heard from you? I'm worried. I stared at the screen for a moment, my vision swimming slightly from the alcohol. Mike had been solid through all this, a rock when everything else in my life was falling apart, but I hadn't let him. I stared at Mike's text, feeling a mix of gratitude and guilt. He'd been checking in on me, always there when I needed someone, yet I hadn't really let him in. I'd been too consumed by my own spiral, trying to make sense of how everything had fallen apart. I couldn't bring myself to reply just yet, though. The alcohol was dulling the sharpest edges of the pain, and for once, I didn't want to think about Natalie, about what was waiting for me back home. Home. The word felt hollow now. That house, once our safe haven, was now just a place where the echoes of broken promises lingered. I couldn't bring myself to go back there, not while the wounds were still fresh, but deep down, I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. I glanced at the empty glass in front of me, considering ordering another round, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the knowledge that no amount of whiskey was going to fix this. Maybe it was the faint glimmer of self-preservation that still flickered inside me. Either way, I shoved the glass aside and stood up, tossing some cash on the bar. Take care, man, Jake called after me as I walked out. See you around. The cool night air hit me like a slap to the face, jolting me out of the numb haze I'd been sinking into. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I couldn't keep running from this. I couldn't keep avoiding the conversation I needed to have with Natalie. The walk back to the motel was a blur. My head was buzzing, not just from the drinks, but from the overwhelming weight of everything. The choices in front of me felt impossible. Stay and try to fix something that might already be broken beyond repair, or leave and rebuild my life from the ground up? Either way, there was no easy way out. When I got back to the motel, I collapsed onto the bed, staring up at the ceiling like I had so many nights before. The familiar ache settled back into my chest, heavier than ever. I reached for my phone, scrolling through the messages again. Natalie's desperate pleas mixed with Mike's concern. Two worlds pulling at me in different directions, and I was stuck in the middle, paralyzed by indecision. I tapped out a response to Mike, finally breaking the silence. I'm hanging in there. Barely. We need to talk soon. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. As much as I wanted to figure this out on my own, I couldn't keep shutting out the people who cared about me. And Mike, well, he'd always been there, even when I wasn't ready to face the truth. So I threw the phone aside and closed my eyes, hoping sleep would come this time. But it didn't. Now, thoughts kept circling back to Natalie, to the mess we were in. I wanted to hate her for what she'd done, for the way she'd shattered our life with a single conversation. But even in my anger, I couldn't shake the love I still felt for her. That was the cruelest part of it all. She had broken me, but I still wanted to save us. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. The knot in my chest was still there, heavy as ever, but I couldn't hide in this motel room forever. If I didn't confront this, it would just fester, poisoning whatever was left of my sanity. I had to face Natalie, even if I didn't have any answers yet. I packed up my things and checked out of the motel, my heart pounding as I drove back toward the house. I didn't know what I was going to say. I didn't even know if I wanted to say anything, but the time for running away was over. When I pulled into the driveway, the sight of the house hit me like a punch to the gut. It looked the same as it always had, our cozy little home, where we built a life together, but now it felt like a stranger's house, a place I no longer belonged. I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the front door, my hands gripping the steering wheel, so tight my knuckles turned white. Part of me wanted to turn the car around and leave, to drive away and never look back, but I couldn't. This was my life, my marriage, and I had to face it no matter how painful it was. Finally, I forced myself out of the car and walked up to the front door. My heart was racing, and my stomach churned with a mix of dread and anger. I wasn't sure what I was walking into, but whatever it was, I couldn't avoid it any longer. When I opened the door, the house was quiet, eerily so. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. The living room was empty, but Natalie's purse was on the kitchen table, so I knew she was home. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before calling out, "Natalie?" There was a pause, and then I heard her voice, soft and hesitant. "I'm in here." I followed the sound of her voice into the dining room, where she sat at the table, her hands folded in her lap. She looked fragile, like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were puffy, her hair disheveled. It was clear she'd been crying, but that didn't soften the knot of anger in my chest. "I didn't know if you were coming back," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't sit down. I stayed standing, leaning against the doorway. I wasn't sure either. She flinched at the coldness in my voice, but I didn't have the energy to soften it. I was too tired, too drained from everything. "I need to know something," I said, my voice firm. "Do you even want to fix this? Or is this just about you wanting to explore while I sit here and wait?" She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She looked down at her hands, twisting them nervously in her lap. "I don't know," she finally admitted, her voice breaking. "I don't know what I want, Alex." Her honesty, while painful, was at least a step in the right direction. But it wasn't enough. "I'm not going to sit here while you figure it out," I said, my voice tight with emotion. "If you don't know what you want, then we're done. I'm not some backup plan for when your exploring is over." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I couldn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. She had made her choice, and now I had to make mine. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered, her voice trembling. I feel so lost." "Lost?" I echoed, incredulous. "You're lost? You've got everything, someone who loves you, a life we built together, and you're lost." She nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "I know it doesn't make sense. I know I'm asking for something impossible. But I'm scared, Alex. I'm scared of waking up one day and realizing I didn't live my life the way I wanted to." I stared at her, the words sinking in. This wasn't about me. It never had been. This was about her own fear of missing out on some imaginary version of life that she thought she deserved. It took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down me. This was it, the moment I had been dreading. "I'm not going to wait around for you to figure out your life," I said, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. "That if you want to go, then go, but you're not going to drag me through hell while you decide what you want." She sobbed, her shoulders shaking, but I didn't move to comfort her. I couldn't. The damage was done. I love you," she whispered through her tears. "I do, Alex, but I don't know how to fix this." I swallowed hard, the ache in my chest almost unbearable. "Maybe we can't." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and final. The silence that filled the room after my words felt endless, suffocating. Natalie's sobs had quieted, but I could still see the tremble in her hands, the weight of everything pressing down on her shoulders. I wanted to feel something, anger, sympathy, anything, but I was empty. I had nothing left to give. Maybe we can't, I repeated, quieter this time, as if saying it again would make it real, make it easier to accept. But it didn't. Nothing about this was easy. Natalie finally looked up, her eyes red and swollen, the raw vulnerability on her face almost too much to bear. "Alex," she whispered, "I never wanted to lose you." "You already have," I replied, the words slipping out before I could stop them. And it was true. Somewhere along the way, she had lost me. Maybe it wasn't the night she told me she wanted to date other men. Maybe it was before that, in all the little moments where I had trusted her, where I believed we were solid only to find out I'd been standing on shaky ground all along. She swallowed hard, her breath shaky. "I don't know how to live without you." I looked away, the knot in my throat tightening. "You're going to have to figure that out, Natalie, just like I have to figure out how to live without you." It hurt to say it. It felt like ripping out the last piece of myself I'd held onto, but it was the truth. There was no going back from this. We were too far gone, too broken to fix. I couldn't pretend that things would ever be the same, not after what she'd done, what she'd asked of me. The betrayal ran too deep. Natalie stood up slowly, her legs wobbling like she was barely holding herself together. She took a step toward me, and for a second, I thought she might reach out, try to touch me, try to fix what Fiber was already shattered. But she stopped herself, her hand hovering in the air before falling back to her side. "Do you really want this to be the end?" she asked, her voice so soft I almost didn't hear it. I looked at her, at the woman I had loved for so long, the woman I had planned to spend the rest of my life with. And for the first time, I realized that the love I had for her, the love that had once felt unbreakable, was fading. It wasn't gone, not completely, but it was slipping through my fingers like sand in an hourglass, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. "I don't want this," I admitted, my voice raw. "But I can't do this anymore, Natalie. I can't be the man who stands by while you figure out who you are. That's not fair to me. It's not fair to us." Her lips trembled, and a fresh wave of tears welled up in her eyes. "I don't want to be without you." "Well, we don't always get what we want," I said quietly, the exhaustion seeping into my bones. "You made your choice, Natalie. You wanted freedom, and now you have it." I could see the heartbreak in her eyes, the realization that this was it, that there was no going back. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. Instead, she nodded slowly, her tears slipping down her cheeks as she turned and walked out of the room. The front door clicked shut, and the silence that followed was deafening. I stood there for a long time, staring at the space where she had been, waiting for something, some feeling, some sign that this was the right decision. But there was nothing. Just the cold, hard reality that my marriage was over. I sank into a chair, my head in my hands. The weight of it all was too much. I had tried so hard to hold on, to fight for something that wasn't worth fighting for. And now all I had left was the empty space where our life together used to be. The next few days passed in a blur. Natalie texted a few times, saying she was staying with a friend, but I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. The house was eerily quiet without her, and I found myself wandering from room to room, feeling like a ghost in my own life. Everything reminded me of her, of us, and I hated it. I hated that she was still everywhere, even when she was gone. I threw myself into work, trying to drown out the thoughts, the memories. But no matter how hard I tried to focus, the pain was always there, lurking in the back of my mind, waiting to catch me off guard when I least expected it. A few weeks later, I found myself sitting in a lawyer's office, signing the papers that would officially end my marriage. It felt surreal, like it was happening to someone else. The lawyer talked me through the process, but his words barely registered. All I could think about was how final it all was, how 7 years of love, trust, and shared memories had led to this. As I signed my name on the dotted line, I felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't the kind of relief that came with joy, but the kind that came with acceptance, the kind that came when you finally let go of something that had been dragging you down for far too long. When I left the lawyer's office, the sun was shining and the world felt different, lighter somehow. I wasn't sure if it was because the weight of the divorce was finally off my shoulders, or because I knew I had done the right thing by walking away. Either way, I felt like I could breathe again. I drove back to the house, but this time, it didn't feel like a prison. It didn't feel like the place where my marriage had died. It was just a house, a place I had once called home, but now it was something else, something that belonged to me alone. I walked inside, letting the quiet settle over me, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel the crushing weight of sadness. There was still pain, of course, but it was different now. It wasn't the kind that suffocated me, it was the kind that told me I was healing, that I was moving forward. That night, I sat in the living room, staring out the window at the stars. I didn't know what the future held, didn't know if I'd ever find love again, or if I even wanted to, but for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to hope, and that was enough. It had to be. As I sat there, the silence no longer felt like an enemy. It felt like a blank slate, a chance to rebuild, to start over. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't the man who would sit idly by while someone else decided my worth. I wasn't the man who would wait for love to come back to me after it had walked away. I was the man who would move forward, one step at a time, and find my own path. alone maybe but stronger than before, then that was the beginning of something new, something mine.